Welcome to Position of Neutrality. Welcome to New Freedom. Got to ask, who's here for the very first time tonight? Wow, a few of you. Good. So, first of all, welcome. And second, let us warn you in advance. You're liable to experience us just a little different than other meetings of other fellowships you may have attended. And the primary reason that's liable to happen is we intend for you to have a different experience here. What we do here, we've been doing for lots of years, we take a look at the suggested instruction for a step or so a week directly out of this book, and we use this book in 12-step recovery. Why? Yeah, the process described by the authors of this book has been proven to work with addicts of the hopeless variety, addicts to alcohol and other substances. In fact, it's been known to work for all kinds of human conditions. That's why there's 12-step fellowships around gambling, eating, sex. Does it make sense? So this will restore us from any human condition we have, or at least the power it reveals in us and through us will restore us from any condition we have. Does that make sense? So whatever it is that brought you here, if you can find your experience in it, then we can promise you a new freedom at New Freedom. Right? All right. And so a little more housekeeping. If you members are new, your family is welcome to join you here at this group and also Saturday night at the Recovery Church. Chaplain Lee officiates that. So you can get in at 6:15. You can hang out in the hallway, see each other, and it doesn't matter if you're in your first 30 days. Your family can come, spend this time, get a little time with you in your recovery while you're getting ready for whatever reuniting is coming after you're done with your programming here, right? Fair enough? So the bad news tonight is that we're going to be in step one. So never ever have I taken anyone through step one experience collectively or individually and not had at least some highs and some lows, and some significant lows sometimes, because powerless and unmanageable are experiences, not concepts, right? So we're going to try and get in touch with personal powerlessness, and we're going to try and get a little bump of power that we're going to gain access to, and it's going to help us move forward into our encounter and our decision. Does that make sense? So the Spirit told me this today. I hadn't done this before ever from this podium, but we're going to do a romp through more about alcoholism rather than through the doctor's opinions and the title page and everything. And the reason I believe is that I think almost everyone in here has had some step experience. Is that true? Been exposed to it to some degree? That's what the Spirit told me today. So in 12-step, they tell us, find out all we can about him, and then it says we suggest you do this as we did on the chapter on alcoholism, correct? Yeah. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to follow instructions. Fair enough? All right, so chapter 3, more about alcoholism. Most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics. When did they discuss with us what a real alcoholic was? Yeah, the doctor opined about the condition of body and mind, and the alcoholics talked about it on page 21, 22, right? A real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, seldom mildly intoxicated, always more or less insanely drunk. Any of you relate to any of that? Okay. All right, so have most of us been unwilling to admit that we were real alcoholics? I'm not that bad yet. Anyone relate to the I'm not that bad yet? Okay. Said no person likes to think he's bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Is that true? It's true. I agree with you. It is usually. Because if I think I'm superior to you, I'd love to point that out to you. But if I think I'm inferior in some way, I'm going to try and cover it up. Okay. All right, so therefore, it's not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people. How many of you have tried to shoot heroin like a gentleman? Did you do it more than once? Can you still count them, or are they countless? Countless vain attempts. After a while, did you expect a different outcome? Now, if you're a real addict, you did the same thing knowing exactly what you were going to get. Right? This is going to suck. Watch. Bring a camera. This will be epic. Okay. All right, so it says the idea that somehow, someday he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. So if you want to know if you're an abnormal drinker, were you able to control and enjoy your chemical use? See, for me, I could sometimes control it, but there was no enjoyment. And then when I enjoyed it, there was no such thing as control. But I tried many times. Yes? Okay. So it says the persistence of this illusion is astonishing. So it's pure illusion that I'm going to somehow control and enjoy, especially in light of the mounting evidence. Yes? Okay. Many pursue it in the gates of insanity or death. Where's my people that made it to detoxes? Where's my ODs? Should be in a coma for a few days? They tell you you should have been dead? God said otherwise. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. How many of you have read The Step on the Wall for years and it didn't say that? You think there's two first steps? No, those were the instructions on the wall, and this is the experience. That's why they said we learned. Right? It didn't matter how many people pronounced me alcoholic. It didn't matter how many times I declared me alcoholic. Until I fully conceded to my innermost self, quit lying to me, and admitted my condition to myself, I had no desperation to do anything else different. Anyone else know what they're talking about? And I didn't learn that out there somewhere. It's been an unfolding event since I got introduced to power and started bearing witness to the power that restored me. Make sense? Okay. So it says this is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently maybe, has to be smashed. I always hear that in meetings, people smashing their own delusion. Do you know the nature of delusion is that you don't know you have it? Yes. So it's virtually impossible for you to smash your own delusion. Right. That's why we help one another, because we can smash theirs. Right. Or not us, but the power in us. Right? I can't help me, but I can help you. Why? Because I can clearly see your plight, even when I'm dying in mine. Yes? Okay? So it says we alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. You notice how they didn't say we've misplaced the ability? Have you ever lost anything? Did you get it back? No, because it was fucking lost. Now I may replace it, but I didn't get that back. They use the words they mean. They mean the words they say. Does that make sense? Okay. So we know that no real alcoholic ever recovers control. Ever. In italics. So you'll have to make that determination whether you're a real alcoholic. That's back on 21 and 22. But we're going to assume you're an advanced group. This is why we're here. Okay? All right, so all of us felt at times we were regaining control. How many of you at times thought you were doing okay? How many of you were wrong? Okay. And it says about their experience, but such intervals, usually brief, were inevitably followed by still less control, which led in time to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. Those are strong words. Pitiful, to evoke contempt from self and others, which left me incomprehensibly, beyond comprehension, impossible to explain, demoralized without fight. How many of you in your addiction got there? When we really put the weight on the word. Some of you felt it. Who felt that? Welcome to understanding the experience of powerlessness and unmanageability. That wasn't who you were, and it wasn't who you wanted to be, but nonetheless, that's who you knew yourself to be in that moment. Yes. Okay. So, it tells us that we are convinced to a man that alcoholics of our type are in the grip of a progressive illness. They're not telling you about your condition, they're telling you of theirs. But if you relate to them and you're having a similar experience, we might want to read through the rest of the chapters, yeah? Okay? So over any considerable period, we get worse, never better. How many of you know that true in your own story? Okay? So we're like men who have lost their legs. They never grow new ones. See how emphatic they are about lost? When you lose your legs are gone. You may replace them, but you won't get them back. When you lose your watch in the ocean, you're unlikely to reclaim that watch. Therefore, you have lost your watch. Does that make sense? So when they say you've lost your power of choice regarding chemicals and sensory pleasures, you're probably not going to get that back. It may be replaced, and hopefully replaced by something superior. But you're going to get led to a decision here pretty soon. Yes? Okay. So it says, neither does there appear to be any kind of treatment which will make alcoholics of our kind like other men. You say, well, I've seen lots of treatment. How many of you have seen lots of treatment? Did you notice our treatment does not try and make you like other men and women? We want you to know that your addiction and your behavioral disorders are a calling, not a curse, and we encourage you to walk with us into your destiny. Does that make sense? But we're not trying to tell you that we're going to treat your addiction. We're not. We're going to treat your spirit, and your mind and body will straighten out. Okay. So it says we've tried every imaginable remedy. In some instances, there's been brief recovery, followed always by a still worse relapse. How many of you relate to that? Physicians who are familiar with alcoholism agree that there is no such thing as making a normal drinker out of an alcoholic. Science may one day accomplish this, but it hasn't done so yet. And how many of them are still trying? How many of you got out of a detox and they said, I'm going to give you this medicine so that you won't experience craving and therefore you won't get loaded? Anyone tell you that? Yes. How'd that work? I said, you people are trying to kill me. I will use past the threshold. Just to prove you motherfuckers wrong. Anyone relate me? So it wasn't going to work to do that. Not for people like me. They're not going to leave us hanging. They're going to introduce us to a superior solution. But we got to read the testimony. We got to relate to the... Because this is an important part. They spent 53 pages plus 17 of the doctor's opinions and all the forwards just talking to us about the first step, an admission of personal powerlessness. And then the rest of the book's only 103 pages of instruction. So over half is all about me figuring out I am not in charge. In spite of the evidence. I say that because some of you know that at least around here, I'm sometimes thought to be in charge. But it's good for all of you to know that I am not. He knows how good that is. Okay, despite all we can say, many who are real alcoholics are never going to believe they're in that class. How many of you have tried to work with people and you could see it and they're just not going to believe? I just make poor decisions. Dude, you cannot make a decision with an unsound mind. Mental illness is a real thing. When you're in addiction, whether active or not, if you have an addictive disorder and you decide to use, you didn't decide. It was an insane act. Yeah. And it's not a choice. It's like you're in a tractor beam. By every form of self-deception and experimentation, they'll try to prove themselves exceptions to the rule, therefore non-alcoholic. So how many of you are already doing that in your mind now? I mean, it really went bad a few times, but it doesn't go bad every time. Who's there? Do you get to pick which time it goes really bad versus the ones it doesn't? Then did you really have control, or is that just that demon lying to you? Okay. If anyone who's showing inability to control his drinking can do the right thing, about face, and drink like a gentleman, our hats are off to him. Heaven knows we've tried hard enough and long enough to drink like other people. So we're not talking about the hard drinker who, given sufficient reason, can stop or moderate. We talked about him, and we'll all try and fit ourselves in that category. We all met him in treatment. I got sober at 17. I never drank again. Didn't trouble me. I'm good. I don't believe in nothing. Okay. I haven't been sober since I was 17. Anyway, I'm just saying we have a little different reaction, right? Where's my drinkers? When you drank, did you find that alcohol energized you? Okay, so a doctor seeing that would notice that alcohol, a sedative, should not be energizing one who's supposed to be getting sedated. Therefore, the doctor would say, that looks like it may be the manifestation of an allergy. See, I thought the allergy was something we joked about in meetings, not a condition I had. Anyway, so here are the methods that we've tried. Drinking beer only. How many of you tried that? That's futile, isn't it? You cannot get enough of that shit down after a while. Never drinking alone. How many of you tried that? How many of you took it from never drinking alone to always drinking alone? Never drinking in the morning. Any of you tried that? Morning don't come if you don't ever stop, man. You got to stay ahead of the curve. Okay. Drinking only at home. Never having in the house, never drinking during business hours, drinking only at parties, switching from scotch to brandy, drinking only natural wines, agreeing to resign if ever drunk on the job. How many of you did set rules for yourself? How many of you broke your own rules? The reason we might want to admit that is because it's starting to lead us to the conclusion that regardless of our theology, I better come to believe in a power greater than me because clearly alcohol's one. And since alcohol is spirits, I'm guessing that I need a spiritual power greater than me. So I'm going to go to the bottom of that page. We do not like to pronounce any individual as alcoholic. How many of you knew that Alcoholics Anonymous suggested if you don't think yourself alcoholic enough, go out and have a drink? Don't beg people not to drink. Don't beg people not to use drugs. You're not that powerful. Step over to the nearest bar room and try some controlled drinking. Where's my heroin users? Where's my crack addicts? Meth, did you smoke it or shoot it? Go ahead and just fire up that pipe and take a quick puff and throw that shit away. Yeah? Don't inhale. It will not take you long for you to decide if you're honest with yourself about it. So the fact that you're laughing tells me you really don't need to try to know that's going to not work out well for you. Yeah? Okay. And if it does, we're not trying to convince you of anything here other than what these guys are saying. The guys are witnessing. This is the book. I should have said at least that. The book is not called The Big Book. The book is called Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. And then they go on to describe the hopeless state of mind and body that is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. And then they talked about half of them were atheists or agnostics. Yet, they encountered power as a result of this process. I conclude probably prior to this process, which has empowered them through the process. And in the process, the power they didn't believe in revealed himself to them through them. That make sense? Okay. So there's no way of proving it, but we believe that early in our drinking careers, many of us could have stopped drinking. How many of you have had that thought? If a frog had wings, he wouldn't have warts on his ass. Right? We didn't stop early enough. Let's have a drink, figure it out. But the difficulty is that few alcoholics have enough desire to stop while there is yet time. How many of you have had that? And they're going to even tell us a story about a guy who did stop in time and then started again and died. Okay? So we've heard but few instances where people who have showed definite signs of alcoholism were able to stop for a long period because of an overpowering desire to do so. Here's one. A man of 30 was doing a great deal of spree drinking. He was very nervous in the morning after these bouts and quieted himself with more liquor. How many of you have done that? Man, I got to get right. 40 in a rock, right? And we get out behind the dumpster and get on it. Okay. So, right, Sean? He was ambitious to succeed in business, but saw that he could get nowhere if he drank at all. How many of you concluded that a long time ago in your youth? If I keep going like I'm going, I'm not going anywhere very fast. The slowest thing in the world is a tweaker in a hurry. Yeah? No? He made up his mind that until he had been successful in business and he had retired, he would not touch another drop. An exceptional man, he remained bone dry for 25 years and retired at the age of 55. After a successful and happy business career, and then he fell victim to the belief which practically every alcoholic has, that his long period of sobriety and self-discipline had qualified him to drink as other men. How many of you went into the prison system, didn't use while you're in? How many of you knew other people that did that? How many of you thought that then addictive disorder wasn't a thing? How many of you learned different about that? So this book, although 80 years old, is still operating. We're still sharing the same experience, yes? So no one's trying to tell you what to do, but we're telling you there ain't nothing new here. Just because you were able, you may be extraordinary in your ability to arrest it, but if it was active once, you didn't kill it. Okay. All right, so out came his carpet slippers and a bottle. In 2 months, he was in a hospital, puzzled and humiliated. Any of you relate to that? He tried to regulate his drinking for a while, making several trips to the hospital in the meantime. Then, gathering all his forces, he attempted to stop altogether and found he could not. Every means of solving his problem which money could buy was at his disposal. Every attempt failed. Though a robust man, at retirement, he went to pieces quickly and was dead within 4 years. Guys, we meet him every day. So what we're trying to do here is not tell you what your condition may be, but if you're relating to it roughly, you might want to look at it because it's, you're at a place of reflection, yeah? Okay, so this case contains a powerful lesson. Most of us have believed that if we remained sober for a long stretch, we could thereafter drink normally. But here's a man who at 55 years found that he was just where he had left off at 30. So the disease progresses even if the addiction is arrested. You may not believe that, but I can tell you my own story. I can tell you that I was a robust man at the age of 37, had been sober since 27. I took a drink again, and I ended up homeless on the streets of Phoenix, Arizona. In spite of my education, I had a contracting business operating in 13 states. I was pretty well-to-do. I had all the means financially to restore me from that condition if it was possible through human aid, and I damn near died before God encountered me again and lifted me up to come talk to you. That's true. And even that wasn't my decision. I just, the chosen don't choose. Okay, so It says, commencing to drink after a period of sobriety, we are in a short time as bad as ever. If we're planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservation of any kind, nor any lurking notion that someday we'll be immune to alcohol. Why is that? Because we learned we had to fully concede to our innermost self. I can't be lying to me. I can't fully concede to my innermost self based on a lie, so if I still am thinking there's some way to beat the game, I'm going to go try it. Any of you had that experience? Okay, so young people may be encouraged by this man's experience to think that they can stop as he did on their own willpower. We doubt if many of them can do it because none of us really want to stop. How many of you started showing up in recovery meetings to please somebody else? And you didn't really want to stop. Sometimes you really wanted to stop, but other times you just needed cover, yeah? Okay. So it says, because of the peculiar mental twist which already acquired, we'll find you won't be able to do it because this mental twist is already acquired and you won't be able to win out. It says, several of our crowd, men of 30 or less, have been drinking only a few years, but they found themselves as helpless as those who had been drinking 20 years. So the progression may be different for you than for someone else. So it really doesn't make any sense to compare yourself to anyone else. Just, what's going on with you, man? I mean, you got gifts, you got skills, you got abilities. What are you doing out here in the freaking street? I don't know. Do you relate? Went out to get cigarettes, ended up in Mexico. Fuck, who knows? To be gravely affected, one does not necessarily have to drink a long time, nor take the quantity some of us have. So how many of you didn't do it as bad as somebody else? How many of you didn't think your story was strong enough? I'm not going to share my story. I haven't hardly done anything. It's probably not happening in this crowd. However, there are people that's really their story. They don't think they're having all the symptoms, but they don't have the depths. That doesn't make them not. What makes you an alcoholic? The abnormal reaction, the one symptom we have in common. If you have taken it in your body and found you could not control it, that's all you need to know that you may want to get release. Okay? All right, so this is particularly true of women. Potential female alcoholics often turn into the real thing and are gone beyond recall in a few years. How many of you, our sisters here, found that to be true? What other people were doing in recovery, you could not manage. You know why? Because for some reason clear back then they knew, and we know it now physiologically, something about these chemicals grips you stronger. So will the Spirit, by the way. So will the Spirit. Certain drinkers who would be greatly insulted if called alcoholics are astonished at their inability to stop. How many of you would be embarrassed, although you declared, I'm an addict, of course I act this way. But then somebody says, you know you're an addict. No, I'm not. I can stop if I want to. Okay. We who are familiar with the symptoms see large numbers of potential alcoholics among young people everywhere. But try and get them to see it. Okay. So as we look back, we feel that we'd gone on drinking many years beyond the point where we could quit on our own power. Is that true for you? You just kept using the way you thought you were using the way you wanted to, and then one day you decided, I need to tame this down, and found out it's a lot easier to let that monkey out of the cage than it is to get him back in. Okay. If anyone questions whether he has entered this dangerous area, let him try leaving drinking alone for 1 year. Any of you tried that? Well, that's the thing. Some people can. If you can do it for a year, then see what's up. How many of you tried it for a period of time, thought you were having success, but found yourself restless, irritable, discontented? The idea that you control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every alcoholic. So I'm not even enjoying life without Spirit. Okay? So in the early days of our drinking, we occasionally remained sober for a year or more, becoming serious drinkers again later. How many of you had that in your story? Okay. Though you may be able to stop for a considerable period, you may yet be a potential alcoholic. We think few to whom this book will appeal can stay dry anything like a year. So they never intended this book for people who, had a little too much wine and burned the turkey. Although I've met them in our fellowships. And if that stopped them and got them on a good life, more power to them. But I had to burn the whole fucking house down first. That's my MO. And if not my house, because I'd already lost mine, I'll come burn yours. That make sense? Okay. So it says that this book won't appeal to anyone that can stay dry for anything like a year, and some will be drunk the day after making their resolutions, most of them within a few weeks. How many of you have had that happen? Okay. For those who are unable to drink moderately, the question is how to stop altogether. So you only have to ask yourself, back in there as a solution, they talk to us about the moderate drinker. He can take it or leave it alone. Yeah? No? Not you? Not moderate? Okay, so if you can't drink moderately, the only difference is, am I a hard drink or dry at the moment, or am I a real deal? Yeah? All right, so we're assuming, of course, the reader desires to stop. So if this is a point where we're supposed to tell them, if you don't desire to stop, don't keep reading. It's going to fuck up your drinking. I'm not kidding, man. You'll waste some valuable high time reading this book. Get after it until you're done. Okay. Whether such a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which he's already lost the power to choose whether he will drink or not. How many of you thought you had the power to choose whether you would drink or use or not, and all of a sudden realized you did not? Yeah, people who cannot or will not. And I always ask people, you think yourself to be a cannot or a will not? And then people say, oh, I'm a will not. Well, we think we're a will not until we find out we're a cannot, huh? So this is all about an end to judgment. And the whole idea is we got to quit out of that argument and realize mental illness is a real thing. Addictive disorder is a real thing. If I don't treat it, if I don't find a superior spirit, I am going to be in trouble because I am dependent on spirits. Okay? So many of us felt that we had plenty of character. Everyone in this room relates to that. Yes? It's a disciplined bunch of people. All of you do have plenty of character. Was it enough to stop your addictive disorder? No, lack of power was our dilemma, right? All right, so there was a tremendous urge to cease forever. Yet we found it impossible. This is the baffling feature of alcoholism as we know it. This utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or the wish. So that's the only thing you got to ask yourself. The baffling feature of the malady is I knew myself to be dangerously dangerous when I put anything in my body, and I could not stop doing it no matter how much I wished to. I've told you that story before of going to meet my parents in church, drinking booze all the way there, puking in front of the church, walking through the church, smelling like a guy who just drank all the way to church and puked in the front yard in front of the church. Walked through, felt the judgment of all the people. My parents always sat 3 rows back from the front, walked all the way up to sit next to them, feeling the judgment burning on me, then crying, tears running down my face, begging God to take from me the desire to go drink, knowing I was going out to finish the bottle under the seat of my car. You guys relate to me? Some of you felt me. So that's powerlessness, unmanageability. Yes? Okay. So, what did I do now? Many of us, okay. How then shall we help our readers determine to their own satisfaction whether they're one of us? The experiment of quitting for a period of time will be helpful, but we think we can render an even greater service to alcoholic sufferers and perhaps to the medical fraternity. So we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking, for obviously this is the crux of the problem. What's the crux of the problem? Mental states that precede a relapse into drinking. My relapse occurs before I use. This is the maddening thing when we're trying to help somebody and why didn't you call me? I ain't sharing. I'll call you when I need a ride in a week. You got to understand addictive disorder, right? It's not that people are meaning to be harmful. They don't understand. They haven't read the textbook. This is just the witness, the collective witness of the first 100. So what sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of the first drink? So we're going to try and relate to them and see if we can place ourselves in that weird mental twist that kept setting it off over and over. Seem like a good exercise? Friends who have reasoned with him after a spree which has brought him to the point of divorce or bankruptcy are mystified when he walks directly into a saloon. Why does he? How many of you have had that experience? How many of you have been the guy walking in and asking yourself, why am I doing it? Of what is he thinking? Of what were you thinking? Sometimes nothing at all. And you, family members, if you're supporting addicts, this is important for you to understand. Your powerlessness that you think you're caring for them is affecting their ability to control, and now you're trying to control them one step removed. You're just as crazy as they are. So we need to restore you too, because we don't want you suffering in that. So our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. This man has a charming wife and family. He inherited a lucrative automobile agency. He had a commendable World War record. He's a good salesman. Everybody likes him. He's an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see, except for a nervous disposition. Uh-oh. How many of you are normal in every way, just a little bit of an edge on you? I know some of you. He did no drinking until he was 35. In a few years, he became so violent when intoxicated that he had to be committed. On leaving the asylum, he came into contact with us. So what happened to poor old Jim? Started drinking at 35, found out he was damn good at it. So good at it, he ended up in an asylum shortly. And guess who showed up? How many of you have ended up in the asylum and had the AAs show up? There is no darker day than yeah. Yeah? Have you had it happen? I have. It's like, holy shit, this is hell. Okay. We told him what we knew of alcoholism and the answer we had found. So they went in and just bore witness to him about what had happened for them. He made a beginning. His family was reassembled, and he began to work as a salesman for the business he had lost through drinking. So how many of you came encounter with AA? Maybe you went to a meeting, and then you bounced a little. That's what Jim's about to describe. All went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Guys, they never soft sell that. Why do we? If you're sitting in our rooms, restless, irritable, and discontent, and you're still saying, piss on that, failing to enlarge my spiritual life, you are going to die drunk. Why would I let you leave here without hearing the truth? Does it make sense? I'm not trying to tell you what's going to happen. I'm just telling you what happens to everybody who has this condition and does not enlarge their spiritual life. Because I'm dependent on spirits. To his consternation, he found himself drunk a half dozen times in rapid succession. How many of you have had that experience? Not going to pick up no matter what. Not safe to have even one. Perhaps I overreacted. On each of these occasions, we worked with him, reviewing carefully what had happened. How many of you have come back to AA, they put their arms around you, came back to CA, HA, whatever A you came back to, and they put your arms around you and said it'll be all right? Or maybe they didn't. Maybe they were jerks. It happens. But you kept coming back because your little act of faith, you had to know with nothing else going on, so you went back even if it wasn't working, huh? That's the nature of faith. If you will just keep coming back long enough, God will put someone there that will help you with your encounter. Okay. All right, so on each of these occasions, we worked with him, reviewing carefully what had happened. He agreed that he was a real alcoholic and in a serious condition. So what's it mean that he agreed he was a real alcoholic? Seldom mildly intoxicated, always more or less insanely drunk, a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, has bottles hidden all around the place. Any of you relate roughly to that guy? Okay. He knew he had faced another trip to the asylum if he kept on. How many of you knew? I'm going to jail. I'm going to go to the hospital. And yet, what happened? Moreover, he'd lose his family for whom he had a deep affection. Yet he got drunk again. We asked him to tell us exactly how it had happened, and this is his story. I came to work on Tuesday morning, and I remembered I felt irritated that I had to be a salesman for a concern I'd once owned. We talked about this a little last week. How many of you have had to take a diminished job? Felt a little irritated. I had a few words with the boss, but nothing serious. How many of you have gotten a little froggy with the boss? How'd that work out? We can always get a new boss, right? When would you? You can't fire me, I quit, right? Then I decided to drive into the country and see one of my prospects for a car. Now let's think about this thinking. This is a man at a car dealership where people come to buy cars. And after a few words with the boss, he decides to drive out in the woods to see somebody who wants to buy a car, but doesn't have time to come to a dealership to do it. How many of you have gone to the dope house to show the fellas how good you're doing? On the way, I felt hungry, so I stopped at a roadside place where they have a bar. Imagine that. How fortuitous. I had no intention of drinking. I just thought I'd get a sandwich. I also had the notion that I might find a customer for a car at this place, which was familiar, for I'd been going to it for years. So luckily, the car buyers who don't go to dealerships, if they ain't in the woods, they are definitely in the bar. That's a trick to remember if you're planning on a next relapse. You're going to be in the bar. Them people that want to buy from you. I'd eaten there many times during the months I was sober. I sat down to the table and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk. Still no thought of drinking. Now they're going to start describing to us that strange mental twist, that queer mental twist. I ordered another sandwich and decided to have another glass of milk, and suddenly the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. So I ordered a whiskey and poured it into the milk. And I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart, but felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. How many of you have had that vague sense? How many of you had the vague sense before you put it in, just on your way to do whatever you were going to do? So they're talking about a sensory experience. There was an effort of the Spirit to rein me in, and my unawareness, I just pushed past it. Okay? So the experiment went so well that I ordered another whiskey and poured it into more milk, and that didn't seem to bother me, so I tried another. How many of you experimented with one and saw that it went so well that you had another? Did you notice his sandwiches quit after a while? Because when you're drinking, you don't want too many sandwiches in there. Yeah? Okay, so thus started one more journey to the asylum for Jim. Here was the threat of commitment, the loss of family and position, to say nothing of that intense mental and physical suffering which drinking always caused him. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic, yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk. So when we look back at it later, it seems foolish, but in the moment, it doesn't seem foolish. Yes? How many of you have done something, maybe you didn't put whiskey in milk, but you did that thing? I went to the dope house, show the fellas how good you were doing, and then just hung out long enough for to think you overreacted. So whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. I like to call that to the attention of the people that have listened to the mantra in fellowships for years where they say insanity is doing the same thing, expecting different results. That's not true of alcoholic insanity, and they don't write it in here. Because I did the same thing with no expectation of a different result. So The fact of the matter is, how can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? So insanity with regard to addiction is a lack of proportion. What I'm willing to trade for a temporary release. Everything. Yes? Okay. So you may think this is an extreme case, but to us it is not far-fetched, for this kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us. We have sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences, but there was always the curious mental phenomenon that paralleled with our sound reasoning. There inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Or maybe relate to what they're saying. They use a lot of fancy words to say, I knew my condition. In spite of that knowledge, some opportunity came up, and I thought, why not? Not that I thought it was going to be different. How many of you thought you could pick your own sobriety date? How many of you had trouble pinning it down, like to the decade? Okay. Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. The insane idea won out. See, they're talking to us about an experience of powerlessness that we can relate to. Does it make sense? And then pretty soon I don't trust my own judgment. And the people I'm telling I'm not going to do it again think I'm lying to them, but at the moment I tell them I'm not going to do it, I'm not lying to them. But then, once it happens to me again, now I'm afraid to tell them. Now I'm going to lie to them. Anyone relate to what I'm saying? Okay. Next day we would ask ourselves in all earnestness and sincerity, how could it have happened? How many of you have had that experience? In some circumstances, we've gone out deliberately to get drunk. How many of you thought that was, screw it, I'm going out and just, come on, we've all had a case of that, right? Feeling ourselves justified by nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. But even in this type of beginning, we were obliged to admit that our justification for a spree was insanely insufficient in the light of what always happened. Again, a lack of proportion, yes? We now see that when we began to drink deliberately instead of casually, there was little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation of what the terrible consequences might be. Yes? So they're just talking about what it's like to be a real alcoholic in this chapter on more about alcoholism. If you're relating to them, then we need to keep reading. Okay? So our behavior is absurd and incomprehensible with respect to the first drink is that of an individual with a passion for, say, jaywalking. I know everyone gets a giggle out of this, right? He gets a thrill out of skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. He enjoys himself for a few years in spite of friendly warnings, and up to this point you would label him as a foolish chap having queer ideas of fun. Luck then deserts him, and he's slightly injured several times in succession. You would expect him, if he were normal, to cut it out. Stop running in front of cars, Lance. You're not as fast as you once were. Presently, he's hit again, and this time has a fractured skull. Within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast-moving trolley car breaks his arm. He tells you that he's decided to stop jaywalking for good. But in a few weeks, he breaks both his legs. Now plug in your addiction to that story. How ridiculous does it sound? Now plug in your addiction, and it didn't seem the least bit ridiculous, did it? That's what they want us to see. So I can't think I'm sane if I can plug in my addiction and defend every silly, stupid thing I did in spite of, it was literally putting 5 rounds in the chamber and spinning it. Click. Only going to happen one time, right? Okay, so on through the years, his conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promises to be careful or to keep off the streets altogether. How many of you changed your playgrounds and playmates? I'm not even going to go out in those streets, then I won't have to run in front of cars. How'd that work? Finally, he can no longer work. His wife gets a divorce, and he's held up to ridicule. He tries every known means to get the jaywalking idea out of his head. He shuts himself up in an asylum, hoping to mend his ways. But the day he comes out, he races in front of a fire engine, which breaks his back. Such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? Again, plug in your addictions and look at the trivial idea that kept you perpetuating it over and over again. That's all they want us to do, get introspective. Eyesight without insight is spiritual blindness. Look inward and see if it isn't crazy. You may think our illustration is too ridiculous, but is it? And now some of you, I can feel you. We went to a powerlessness experience. Some of you are reflecting here, right? You know why I call to your attention what I'm feeling you're feeling? Because there's one who has all power. That one is God. The fact that we're sharing an experience, we're sharing that oneness in here. You need to know that. That's him carrying your burden. However intelligent we may have been in other respects, where alcohol has been involved, we've been strangely insane. It's strong language, but isn't it true? Okay. Some of you are thinking, yes, what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. We admit we have some of these symptoms, but we've not gone to the extreme some of you fellows did. We talked about that, right? Nor are we likely to, for we understand ourselves so well after what you've told us that such things cannot happen again. We've not lost everything in life through drinking, and we certainly do not intend to. Thanks for the information. Guys, if you're here now and you're in this facility, you're going to meet people like that out in the fellowship that haven't had the experience you've had, and the only people that can tell the truth to them is you, because you're the only ones who know. It's a burden, but you're being brought up to carry it. Not truth without grace, but admitting this is what I discovered about me. And you may hear a lot of silly stuff, but it didn't apply to me. And if you don't think this can happen to you, let me tell you what happened to me. Yeah? That may be true of certain non-alcoholic people who, though drinking foolishly and heavily at the present time, are able to stop or moderate. So now they're talking about that heavy drinker. How many of you have tried to stop or moderate? You've already told me you weren't moderate. So how many of you had sufficient reason to stop and didn't? Okay, well that's the qualifier for the heavy drinker. So because their brains and bodies have not been as damaged as ours were, but the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. So you have to check your own stuff. They're just saying, we don't know who you are. All we know is our experiences. If you're the real deal, you will not be able to stop based on self-knowledge. You will have to grow spiritually. And no one's trying to tell you who you are, but what we're telling you is if it is you, we want you to know who you are and whose you are, and then you'll be free. Yeah? Okay. So this is a point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize to smash home upon our alcoholic readers that it's been revealed to us out of bitter experience. Let us take another illustration. Fred is a partner in a well-known accounting firm. His income is good. He has a fine home, is happily married, and the father of promising children of college age. He has so attractive a personality that he makes friends with everyone. How many of you have met that guy? How many of you have been that guy? Okay. If ever there was a successful businessman, it's Fred. To all appearance, he's stable, well-balanced individual, yet he's alcoholic. We first saw Fred about a year ago in the hospital where he'd gone to recover from a bad case of jitters. How many of you ended up in a hospital for a bad case of jitters? Back in these days, you didn't go there for alcoholism because there was no disease of alcoholism. There was no addicted disorder. But sometimes if you drink long enough, you wake up a little shaky. And then some people would call that a bad case of jitters. But we might blow it off on stress or something like that, yeah? It was his first experience of this kind. He was much ashamed of it. Far from admitting he was an alcoholic, he told himself that he came to hospital to rest his nerves. Any of you go to get a little rest? The doctor intimated strongly that he might be worse than he realized. How many of you had doctors telling you that you might want to think further about your condition? Most of us encountered doctors who said, you might want to rethink that. Okay. For a few days, he was depressed about his condition. Any of you get to where you were reflective enough to be really depressed? Maybe I'll never be able to use again. Might as well kill me now, right? Okay. He made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. It never occurred to him that perhaps he could not do so in spite of his character and standing. Fred would not believe himself an alcoholic, much less accept spiritual remedy for his problem. We told him what we knew about alcoholism, and he was interested and conceded that he had some of the symptoms, but he was a long way from admitting that he could do nothing about it himself. So how many of you are there? The good news is that's like a high percentage of people that come to our fellowships are there. Now you may bump a little until you realize you're going to need to access spiritual power, but that's not unusual. We make it sound like it sometimes in fellowships, but the fact is we get here and we're not quite there to admit our condition, yeah? So he was positive that his humiliating experience plus the knowledge he had acquired would keep him sober for the rest of his life. Self-knowledge would fix it. We heard no more of Fred for a while, and then one day we were told he was back in the hospital. So how many of you had a trip to the hospital, learned a little bit about it, and after a little while ended up back in the hospital? This time he was quite shaky. He soon indicated that he was anxious to see us. So these AAs knew what they were doing. They were armed with the facts about themselves. They went and told him what was up, and then they left, and we'll part friends, and if you need anything, give us a call. And guess what he did? He didn't feel judged, so when he got jammed up, he called. The story he told is most instructive, for here was a chap absolutely convinced he could stop drinking, who had no excuse for drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination in all his other concerns, yet was flat on his back nevertheless. Let him tell you about it. I was much impressed with what you fellows said about alcoholism, and I frankly did not believe it would be possible for me to drink again. How many of you got to that point at some point? I know enough. I'm not doing that again. How many of you were wrong? I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink, but I was confident that it could not happen to me after I had learned, I reasoned, and I was not so far advanced as most of you fellows. That's the danger of the people that come in, and I'm not as bad as you. If we just go in and tell war stories, instead of telling what we were like, what happened, and what we're like now, a lot of people have gone to telling what it was like. And that's just a perspective, and you may not relate, or I may be trying to embellish, or I may be trying to impress you with what a badass addict I was. And I'm not getting to you about the deplorable state, the pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization, the inability to speak the truth, to live the truth, the inability to even get out of my own way, to get out of the gutter, to wash myself, in spite of the desire to do so. So, it says that, I'm going to jump down. I felt that I had every right to be self-confident. It would only be the matter of exercising my own willpower and keeping on my guard. In this frame of mind, I went about my business for a time, and all was well. I had no trouble refusing drinks and began to wonder if I had been making too hard work of a simple matter. Perhaps I overreacted. Right? One day I went to Washington to present some accounting evidence to a government bureau. I'd been out of town before during this particular dry spell, so there was nothing new about that. Physically, I felt fine. Neither did I have any pressing problems or worries. My business came off well. I was pleased and knew my partners would be too. It was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. This guy had no reason whatsoever, no lurking notion, nothing. I went to my hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner, and as I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind that it would be nice to have a couple cocktails with dinner. That was all. How many of you have had that whisper of a deceiver in your ear? What could it hurt? I ordered a cocktail and my meal. Then Then I ordered another cocktail, and after dinner I decided to take a walk. When I returned to the hotel, it struck me that a highball would be fine before going to bed. So I stepped into the bar and had one. I remember having several more that night and plenty the next morning. I have a shadowy recollection of being in an airplane bound for New York and of finding a friendly taxi cab driver at the landing field instead of my wife. The driver escorted me about for several days. I know little of where I went or what I said and did. And then came the hospital with unbearable mental and physical suffering. You guys relate to him? I used to have to check my pocket for the airplane ticket to see where in the hell I had ended up. And I thought I was having a good time. As soon as I regained my ability to think, I went carefully over that evening in Washington. Not only had I been off guard, I'd made no fight whatever against the first drink. See, there is no effective mental defense against the first drink if you're a real alcoholic. This time I had not thought of the consequences at all. I had commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. I now remembered that my alcoholic friends had told me how they prophesied that if I had an alcoholic mind, the time and place would come, I would drink again. They had said that although I did raise a defense, it would one day give way to some trivial reason for having a drink. I'm going to stop there because that's a good place to stop. Why is it important that we bear witness to our experience? Because people come in and have that experience, and they end up having some of the difficult experiences that many of you have had, and we have the ability, by telling the truth of our testimony, to avert the suffering for thousands. And you'll find purpose in that. So thank you very much. See you next week.